Imagine for a moment that you are a head chef, not at the French Laundry or Alinea, not at a local diner or Greasy Spoon. No, you're the head chef at a big chain like Applebee's or Cheesecake Factory. And it's your job to oversee a menu that will be used at hundreds of locations, or thousands. Your menu needs to satisfy customers in the suburbs and appeal to diners who live in foodie cities. It needs to have classics and comfort food, but also fun new dishes and drinks that reflect new tastes and trends. So how do you decide what to add and when? My guest today is Lizzy Freier. Lizzy is a trend forecaster. She leads the menu research team at Technomic. And for more than 15 years, she's helped national restaurant chains answer questions like these. Her job is to identify which food trends will, by the time the restaurant develops a new drink or dish, be widespread enough that a critical mass of customers are excited to order them, but still novel enough that foodies and adventurous eaters are excited about them. In other words, Lizzy predicts the future popularity of yuzu and imitation meat and hot sauces that are sweet and spicy, or swicy. Most people who claim they can predict the future should be ignored. Lizzy's forecasting is possible because food trends tend to follow a predictable pattern. In our conversation, we talked about this life cycle of a food trend, whether trends in social media make the food world more of a monoculture, and the biggest insight for me, how trendy restaurants and top chefs end up acting like R&D labs for big chains like Cheesecake Factory and Applebee's. I'm Alex Mayasi. This is Gastronomics. Lizzy Freier, thank you so much for joining Gastronomics.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex.
Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Lizzy Freier. I'm the Senior Director of Menu Research and Insights at Technomic.
Of all the types of trend forecasting, doing restaurant menus seems likely the most fun. What is most exciting to you about being in trend forecasting?
Seeing if the things that we think will happen will actually happen. I mean, that is the ultimate goal, right? We want to help support our clients, and when we get it right, it brings me a lot of joy.
I know you can't always talk about your specific clients and cases, but is there a trend you were watching very early that you thought was going to be big and you had that satisfying moment of seeing it really come to fruition, seeing it on restaurant menus?
Yes. If you think back 15 years ago when I started this job, sriracha was everywhere. There was a big sriracha mania. And a big question was, okay, what's going to be the next sriracha? So we did a lot of research and discovering what are some of the other global chili-based sauces that have a little bit of heat, but also have a lot of other complex flavor profiles that might become the next sriracha. And we had a number of guesses at the time, but at the top of my list, I really was kind of pulling for Korean gochujang, which similarly does have heat, but it also has, those savory umami flavor profiles incorporated into it as well. And since then, we have seen gochujang really kind of have a lot of momentum on some mainstream menus, particularly with chicken wings, which I love.
I do want to ask you a skeptical question about trend forecasting here, because I imagine if I am someone who, say, is in charge of the menu for Applebee's or Cheesecake Factory, and you come to me and you say, I can tell you what's going to trend, which foods will be really big. Like, you are somewhat claiming to predict the future. Shouldn't I be a little bit skeptical of that claim?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no one can predict the future. But remember, we're not basing this off of my subjective feelings. We're basing it off of real data of things that we are actually seeing on menus, of things that actual consumers are claiming that they want. And so that's the one thing that I would provide some skepticism on, but I would provide it myself as well, in that sometimes consumers say they want something, but they won't necessarily always order it. We did see a lot of that with imitation meat. So they wanted more plant-based options. We saw a lot of operators offering things like imitation meat on the menu, and they weren't necessarily ordering it. So I do think that that provides like a level of, okay, we've got to be a little bit careful there. So I understand the skepticism, but I do think that people need to remember that this is not just coming out of nowhere.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the tools of trend forecasting. What are the tools you use to be aware of what's happening and then also make predictions?
So we have an Ignite menu tool. So on one end, we have a dashboard where we're collecting thousands of operator menus, and we are updating or refreshing those on a quarterly basis. So that is menu item names, descriptions, sizes, prices. So you're able to search something like chicken, and you'll be able to understand, okay, how is chicken trending on menus? What types of dishes? What are some of the sauces that are most commonly getting paired with chicken? And how has that changed over a period of time? So that's certainly helpful from what's trending on a menu perspective. But also, we're running recently launched items through a consumer survey every single month. So consumers are rating those items on level of appeal and how likely they are to purchase it. So if you take Popeye's chicken sandwich, we're putting that through a consumer survey. They're rating that item on how likely they are to purchase it. And that kind of helps us get a better understanding of what's trending as well. And then social listening. So what is happening online as far as net sentiment of different...
Yeah. What's happening on TikTok? How are people reacting to it on social media?
Exactly. So all of those tools together really help us get that full view of what's happening, what's been happening, and then what might that mean for menus 2 years down the line.
When you say you have data from restaurant menus, I think it's something like 30,000 menus. Is that right?
35,000, correct.
Okay. So this is, it's a substantial data set.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe my comparison would be, you are not like reading tea leaves to predict whether it will rain next week. You are instead looking at the radar and the clouds that are moving in and the weather data to forecast whether the weather will move in and a certain rain will come.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Just like how weather forecasters have historic rainfall data and the latest radar readings, Lizzy and Technomic have all this food trend data. They could see sriracha getting more popular. They could track gochujang appearing on more and more American menus. But that didn't mean sriracha and then gochujang would inevitably become super popular and mainstream. Their popularity could have stalled out. Some trends fizzle and end up just being fads. So trend forecasters like Lizzy need to distinguish between temporary fads and enduring trends. Lizzy says that Technomic's platform includes algorithms that use machine learning and AI to predict future trends. It's like how hedge funds in Wall Street feed financial data into algorithms that predict whether stock prices will go up or down. But the most powerful insight of trend forecasting in the food world is that enduring trends tend to follow a predictable pattern.
There is a typical life cycle of trends. Typically, we're going to see it starting in this, what we call an introduction phase, which is your one-off, really trendy, independent restaurant. And then it might move into what we're calling a growth phase, which is your emerging chains, a little bit more of your upscale, casual dining operators. And then might move mainstream, which is getting a little bit more widely adopted on traditional casual dining menus. Think your like Applebee's or your Chili's, as well as your fast casual menus. And then that last step is maturity. That's your fast food or quick service restaurants and your family style mid-scale operators like your IHOPs or your Cracker Barrels. So when we think about traditional trend movement and that life cycle, that is usually what we see. And speaking of that, we also usually see trends move from food service to retail and traditionally from food to beverage.
Is there an example you're able to share of a time where maybe you saw something trending in the data, but you had this kind of either gut instinct or like wider subject matter or knowledge of the food world that told you, actually, that's not something that I think will become really popular or something that would be smart to recommend to clients?
Yeah, so our data is showing that Dubai chocolate is currently the fastest growing ingredient on operators' menus.
I've had people ask me about why pistachio and chocolate snacks and things are everywhere. The data shows this, it sounds like. Dubai chocolate truly is everywhere.
It is, absolutely. But there is a difference between a trend and a fad. So let's take hot honey. Around, I want to say like 2023, 2022 maybe, that was when we started to see a much steeper uptick in operators offering hot honey. So that kind of perked my ears up at the time. So I'm like, okay, if that's happening, what are some of these other things that we're seeing happen that we traditionally do see when we're predicting something to trend a little bit more? So with that formula, you got to think about, okay, is there new operator penetration? So for hot honey, when we initially saw it grow, it was more so in kind of your pizza concepts, right?
I could think about like 2017, 2018, having hot honey on pizzas in Brooklyn.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And I think the trend actually started in New York. So that actually really makes sense.
A rare moment of me being part of an early trend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So exciting. So during kind of that 2022, 2023 time, that was when we started to see new types of operators starting to offer hot honey. So think those varied menu concepts, sports bars, a lot of global cuisines as well. So think like Asian or even like Mexican cuisines offering hot honey. So that was one part of the formula where we were like, okay, that's interesting. Now we're seeing different types of concepts offer it. Another thing is new meal part penetration. So again, hot honey, typically saw it on pizzas. But a couple of years ago, that was when we started to see non-alcohol beverages, desserts, and even cocktails starting to feature hot honey. So that was another kind of point where I was like, that's interesting as well. Another thing is seeing specific dishes really start to explode with the featuring of hot honey. So again, that goes back to pizza, chicken sandwiches too. I mean, started to see hot honey all over those. And then new variations on hot honey. So think like harissa honey or habanero honey. So when you see all of those different facets of that formula, that is how I really kind of decipher the difference between a fad and a trend. Dubai chocolate, though, it really kind of popped up very suddenly. We did not see that traditional progression. And now that doesn't mean that it couldn't become a trend. I just don't think we have necessarily seen all of those other kind of iterations in that formula that we typically see. And so, yes, Dubai chocolate is seeing massive growth on menus right now. I think it's still kind of a wait and see time for that one to know if it's going to actually turn into a true trend or if it's simply kind of a fad for the right now.
So Lizzy and trend forecasters have a theory of how food trends start in trendy indie restaurants and then spread to other restaurants and then national chains and fast food. That's not what's happened with Dubai chocolate. So she's a bit skeptical that pistachio and chocolate everything is here to stay. But is that theory out of date? Like, sure, it may be that in ancient times, before Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, trends started with a cool chef in Brooklyn or LA. But now social media is where ideas spread and trends are born. So maybe Dubai chocolate's social media fame is the new normal. Trend forecasters do, of course, pay attention to social media. But Lizzy still believes in the primacy of the traditional model, because there's an economic logic to why food trends tend to follow that pattern. Can you actually see in your data that most successful trends do go through this life cycle we described, and it's not actually the case that like this is propaganda by coastal elites in their overpriced restaurants who want to think they start all the trends, and you can actually see in the data that that actually is the most common life cycle of a trend?
Yeah, no, that is actually what we traditionally see in the data. And it does make sense, right? Because if we're talking a one-off restaurant, they can much more easily supply those maybe ingredients that are global or a little bit harder to get, or maybe use a preparation or a presentation that's a little bit harder. It's a lot easier to do that in a one-off restaurant, just like it's a lot easier to do it in an emerging chain restaurant compared to a major chain restaurant. And so that's why it takes so much longer for those major chains to really adopt those trends. They want to make sure that it's going to be something that's appealing to their customer, that is relatively easy to execute from an operational or supply chain perspective. And they have to make sure that the margin on that item is going to make sense. You don't want to roll out something super crazy and out there if you're McDonald's or Starbucks, not having done your research or at least been able to see other operators, perhaps smaller operators, be able to execute it. So that is kind of like sensibly, it makes sense.
That's really interesting because I can't imagine, like, if I'm in charge of the menu for every Cheesecake Factory in the country, I might really like yuzu as an ingredient, but it's a pretty big risk to try and add it to the menu for every Cheesecake Factory in the country. So it does seem like there's an interesting way where some of these bigger national chains, they almost rely on independent small restaurants, especially the kind of like trendy ones that are taking risks, to almost do some of their R&D for them, like to do the proof of concept of adding yuzu lemonade or a yuzu cocktail to the menu before they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There are so many different implications to either being the first to market or doing that wait and see approach. And different things might make sense to different brands. But what is interesting is we have noticed that life cycle moving a lot faster in recent years than it has in the past. And I think a lot of that has to do with social media. Right. Younger consumers, they want to see those trends at their top chain restaurants faster. So it is causing a little bit of a challenge for a lot of these major chain restaurant operators to be able to execute these trends on a very fast moving basis. So that is why it's just becoming more and more critical for suppliers and operators to work together and work a lot more closely and have your supplier partners really help you execute that at an operational level.
Yeah. I'm sure you're a consummate professional who is putting your clients first, but I would love to know, are there any food trends that you've found yourself rooting against just because you personally dislike them?
No, I don't. No, I don't root against anything, but certainly there are many I would say that I root for. Okay. Simply because often I've been tracking it for so long and I want to be right that it is going to be something that, explodes. And then, of course, selfishly, there's some things that I prefer over others. So I'd like to see them expand a bit more.
Okay, that's fair. I think for myself, the trend that I've been rooting for a long time is ube, right? Kind of like purple yam, very common in Filipino cuisine. And there was a moment when I kind of like saw it at Trader Joe's. They released this like ube mochi pancake mix and I got very, very excited. But, it's not like I see ube on menus everywhere. Do you have your own ube? What's your ingredient that you've been rooting for to break out?
Well, first of all, I do love the ube trend. And the fact that Starbucks now has an ube drink on its menu is a pretty big sign that it has gone mainstream. And I think they executed it really well with regard to like how they put it in one of their drinks.
So will I owe a big thank you note to Starbucks? Like, you think they're doing it well in advancing ube's cause in the U.S.?
I do, yes. They really leaned into the social media driven aspect of it. They have it very nicely in like a layered application.
Yeah. It's bright purple. It feels like it would be crazy for it not to trend very successfully in our current Instagram, TikTok visual focused age.
Yes. So I do think we're going to see more operators adopting ube on their menus.
Yeah. The way Lizzy talked about ube made me realize that tracking which foods are trending and predicting if they'll keep getting more popular is just one part of a trend forecaster's job. Because if more and more people are seeking out ube, does that mean you should serve ube ice cream or a traditional Filipino food with ube, or maybe an ube Rice Krispie treat? Plus, lots of food trends are more like concepts, like the growing desire for healthy foods and ingredient lists that are short and recognizable. And a big trend right now is foods that are sweet and spicy, or swicy, a term I kind of hate, but I do love spicy things like hot honey and tagine on the rim of sweet cocktails. So a big part of Lizzy's job is advising clients how to adapt to a new food trend and what exactly they should add or change that makes sense for their menu.
You mentioned yuzu, and that made me think of Cara oranges. Really starting to see those expand a lot more in that independent restaurant space. So I do think that that's one that we're going to see having a little bit more momentum. I mean, I think that there are so many different citrus varietals out there that have a lot of interesting menu applications. So, you were talking about yuzu. Seeing a yuzu lemonade makes yuzu a little bit more, palatable and less scary, right? Because it's a lemonade, it's just with a different type of citrus varietal. So I think when operators are thinking about how to adopt things on their menu, they have to think about how they're naming it as well and how they are applying it to a menu. Is it in something that's going to appeal to adventurous and less adventurous consumers alike? Because, depending on your brand, you're usually going to get both of those folks in your operation.
This reminds me that the journalist Derek Thompson wrote a book called Hitmakers. And one of his big ideas, kind of the thesis of the book, is that for something new to become big, it both needs to have novelty that excites people, but it also needs to feel familiar enough that it's not strange. So it strikes me that that's maybe part of what's going on with yuzu lemonade. Like, is that something you often see with trend forecasting, like an ingredient that's maybe new to, say, an American audience? People are at least initially looking for ways to kind of wrap it in a familiar packaging.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, especially for a major chain restaurant, that is the best way to go about it, because otherwise it's going to be scary. If you think about a lot of the trends that have had a lot of momentum, they have been applied to either dishes or drinks in ways that are less scary, I would say, in that way. So if you think about gochujang, applying it to a chicken wing, it's kind of just a different variation on either barbecue sauce or buffalo sauce. We're seeing this with ube because it's in a beverage, and a beverage is less of, I would say, kind of a pull from the consumer standpoint than maybe wasting an entree with ube if you don't know if you're going to like it. And so I do think that there's something to say about offering these items in kind of your ancillary menu categories, like your appetizers or your beverages or desserts, as opposed to entrees as well.
Yeah. And I think it can get a little cringe at times, but I think this is probably partially why we so often see new foods introduced in the US as like blank tacos. It's like a Korean taco, or it's like a this taco or a that taco. It's like that idea of couching something new and novel to your customers in what's familiar for them.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, speaking of Korean tacos, I mean, fusion cuisine in general is really meant to kind of do that, right? So like taking maybe something that is a little bit less familiar, pairing it with something that is more familiar, and making it a little bit more palatable.
Yeah. I can't imagine that sometimes people are frustrated if it's like an ingredient or food from their culture, like their background. It can feel like not great to see it put in this different language for an American audience. Do you have some sort of like, whether your personal feelings or professional opinion about how to try and like navigate both this need to make a new ingredient comfortable to an audience, but without alienating people who like that's a food they've been familiar with. That's something they grew up eating potentially.
Yeah. You're always going to get, a group of people who might not like what an operator is doing with a specific menu item. It's just about how that item fits into a brand's positioning. Does it make sense? Is it being marketed appropriately? Are you trying to say this is absolutely accurate and in line with a global cuisine? Or are you being a little bit more honest and just saying, like, this is a flavor profile that we like, and it goes really well with this other flavor profile that we have paired on the menu? So I think that really speaks in general just to the importance of transparency. People want to understand maybe the inspiration behind the specific item, whether it be inspired by a locale or a specific region, or getting a backstory about why something was offered on the menu. I think those provide a lot of value to the customer. And I think really it just kind of comes down to being honest about that. If it's not truly authentic, don't claim it is authentic.
Yeah. Let me do one follow-up before moving to something new. I think you start talking about, was it Cara oranges?
Yes.
Yeah. Could you tell me, why are you rooting for Cara oranges?
I think I've just seen really broad range of applications with this type of citrus. It has a flavor profile that kind of is more on the sweet side as opposed to the acidic side. And so we've seen it in salad dressings, we've seen it in desserts, I think it has play very well in a lot of different types of entrees. I've just been seeing it increasing a little bit more and more. So that is one that I've definitely been watching quite a bit. It's starting to have very similar menuing and momentum that yuzu and Meyer lemon both had a few years ago, and those two have definitely gone more mainstream as of late.
What kind of dish or drink do you really want Cara oranges in?
Oh, a cocktail. I think that would be amazing. Yeah. I love a citrus cocktail. I think it has a perfect play in the cocktail space. But really anything. If you think about ceviche or a crudo, I think that having a Cara orange as the citrus base, I think could be a nice play too.
Well, I'd love to get a better sense of how trend forecasting works by kind of acting as if I'm a client coming to you for advice. And I'm sure with a real client, you would not give an off-the-cuff answer. You'd probably do a lot of research, spend time looking at data, and so on. But we'll kind of do this lightning round style. So let's start with one. Let's say I'm at a fast food chain, kind of like Shake Shack or Chick-fil-A. Okay. And I come to you and I say, we're thinking about adding an ube milkshake to the menu. What might be your advice to me?
Okay, this is fun. I like this. Given Starbucks and some other top chains have started to adopt it on their menu, I don't think that it's out of the question. I would say if you're thinking of doing that, you got to think about how are you going to acquire it, thinking about it from a volume perspective. Is this going to be a limited time offer? If so, how long? Or is this going to be on their core menu? Thinking about the social media aspect of it, because we know that ube has that vibrant purple hue to it. So you've got to push that highly on social media. So yeah, I don't think that is totally out of the question. I would say Shake Shack, a little bit more likely than a Chick-fil-A to go a little bit more out of the box with some of those emerging flavors.
I would say it does seem like you're politely coaching me away from the idea rather than giving me a big thumbs up that it's a good idea.
Well, I always want to be hesitant. I mean, you gotta look at cannibalization. Shake Shack, they're known for their shakes. What other shakes do they have on their menu? Does it make sense? Is there another beverage you can be thinking about? Because we know that beverages are so big right now and a big driver for restaurants. So can we think about maybe ube lemonade? Might that be a little bit of a safer play? I don't know. So got to think about all of the different aspects of it. I just want you to think about it from every angle.
Okay, yeah. Let's do another one. Let's say I am coming to you from like a casual restaurant chain, something like an Applebee's or a TGI Fridays. And I know a lot of customers, especially younger ones, are not drinking as much alcohol. And so I would love your advice on like, what is some sort of trend that might push some of our customers who aren't ordering beer or wine or cocktails to still kind of spend that money on drinks and have a larger check?
Great question. Alcohol-free beverages are booming right now. We are particularly seeing those alcohol-free cocktails finding a lot of momentum. So yeah, I think that offering up perhaps a mocktail, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a mocktail. I think I would go for a phrase that provides a little bit either more straightforward evaluation or maybe use a fun play on a cocktail name like a fojito. But we've also been seeing a lot of innovative alcohol-free spirits and alcohol-free wines having momentum. So with those alcohol-free spirits, think of incorporating something like Seedlip, which is a non-alcohol distilled spirit. It has flavors reminiscent of classic spirits, but without the ABV. And so if you maybe swap that into a traditional cocktail that you have on your menu in place of the gin or vodka or whatever you might have in there, that might have a lot of interest or support from clients. But another component to think about, and certainly this will be tricky from a major chain perspective right now because of federal legislation and regulations, but thinking about those cannabis drinks, we have seen younger consumers especially replacing some of their alcohol beverage occasions for cannabis occasions. And so this is going to differ depending on state and depending on the federal legislation, especially we have a ban kind of coming up. I think it's in November where we're going to see the government kind of give their final word on whether that's going to have a ban, particularly for those hemp-derived THC beverages. But because we are seeing an increasing normalization of cannabis, I think that that might be one to really look into.
I want to ask you about Wendy's, because Wendy's has had some low sales, announced they were closing a pretty meaningful number of stores this year. And there's a food and business reporter who his take was Wendy's tried to do too many things. They chased too many trends. They had like 10 or more versions of Frosties. They got away from like a good, simple menu. This is Adam Chandler, the journalist. So given that you are in the business of helping many restaurants and food brands chase trends, what is your reaction to that analysis that Wendy's got in trouble by chasing too many trends?
I think a lot of things went into play as far as what has happened with Wendy's. So first, before I talk about the menu, I mean, the competition in the burger space is high and growing. And a lot of folks have said Wendy's restaurants feel a little bit old, feel a little bit tired, whereas a lot of competitors have heavily remodeled or modernized their locations. They have things like digital kiosks and so on. So I think that that is something that we have to think about as well. Going back to the menu, food quality of your core menu is so important. And so if you are thinking about rolling out new limited time offers, no matter where it is on your menu, you have to remember that your core offerings are going to be what's driving visits of your core loyal customers. So if you start to lose sight of your core items and what made your operation what it is today, that's going to alienate your core customer, and you never want to do that. And so I do think from a value and pricing perspective, they have some things to work on. But I don't think it's because they've offered a bunch of limited time offers. I think that they probably need to be a little bit more strategic with their limited time offer launches, while also remembering that they have a menu and brand positioning that they need to keep in line with. And if it's going to alienate anybody from their core group, they maybe need to rethink that. Yeah,
because I can imagine that like I personally would probably drive to Wendy's immediately if they announced an ube frosty. But I could imagine like not everyone wants to be adventurous when they eat. So it does seem like there's some trade-off there between offering novelty versus consistency and familiarity.
Absolutely. And I think too, you have to remember, is your core customer asking for novelty? And if so, where are they asking for novelty on the menu? And if that comes at the expense of the core items that probably have the highest margins and are doing the best, then we cannot think about just focusing solely our attention on that.
We've talked a lot about limited time offers. Why are they so important to trend forecasting?
Well, I mean, we've been seeing increasing uptick in top 500 chain restaurants offering limited time offers. So every single year over the past 5 years, we have seen growing numbers of LTOs. And over the past 5 years, it's 134% uptick in limited time offer launches at top 500 chain restaurants. And that is huge. If you compare that to what's been going on with core menus, we're in the single digits there for both limited service and full service restaurants. So a lot of the focus and attention from operators is coming from limited time offers. Additionally, limited time offers are a great place to trial or test a lot of these new and unique flavors. And over a quarter of consumers actively seek out newer unique flavors to try on a regular basis. And that increases to 33% of those ages, I think it's 25 to 34. So those consumers, if you think about it, those are deeply rooted in that consumer set that is visiting food service the most often. So that's why we're seeing so many operators really turning to the new and unique and turning toward it specifically from that limited time offer landscape.
So far, Lizzy and I had been talking enthusiastically about foods that we'd like to see trend more and pop up on more menus. Lizzy wants her Cara Cara orange cocktail. I'd love to see eaters near me offer ube cheesecake, halo halo, and ube rice cakes. But I worry that trend forecasting, combined with the speed and hegemony of Instagram and TikTok, could make the food world less interesting. Like, pistachio and chocolate are a fun combo. I had a pistachio and chocolate dessert during Denver Restaurant Week, and it was great. But I don't want chocolate and pistachio everything everywhere all at once. Plus, lots of delicious food isn't visually stunning and doesn't pop on Instagram and TikTok. I don't want those dishes and drinks to disappear. So I asked Lizzy about this. There's a way that chasing trends, I imagine, could make the food world more of a monoculture. But of course, food trends are also about trying new things. So I'm very curious for your take of, like, does trend forecasting make the food world more interesting?
Yes.
I'm asking you, I know you're somewhat biased, but
yes.
I would like to hear kind of your explanation of why.
Yeah, no, so I understand what you're saying. Absolutely. So if I were to be like, hey, sriracha's the big thing, and then everybody puts sriracha on their menu and everything just tastes the same. Like, yeah, no, that's not fun. We don't like that. Yeah. But different operators put their own twists on any individual trend, right? So yes, if I was like, okay, sriracha's making this huge comeback, we're going to see it everywhere. One operator might put it in a Bloody Mary with another interesting flavor profile. Another might put it in a waffle. There are a lot of different applications for a lot of these trends. But overall, what I think is the most important, rather than talking about a specific ingredient or a specific flavor, are the macro trend elements that encompass these individual things. So if I'm talking about the evolution of social media driven innovations and how it moved from what we initially saw on Facebook to then Instagram to then TikTok, and with TikTok being so focused on video. And so what looks good in a video from a restaurant standpoint, it might be an item that is smoking, or maybe you're putting butterfly pea flower in a cocktail and you're changing the color of that cocktail from this kind of deep purple to a light pink. So that would not have been as interesting if video did not become so big from that sharing social media format. So I think thinking about that and how these macro trends impact and kind of bring up some of these micro trends, that is how we can make these trends not just the same everywhere and every operator. Every operator can make it their own based on what makes the most sense for their brand.
There's room for creativity within these big trends.
Absolutely.
Well, that seems like a really nice place to end. So let's end with our two final questions. I'd love to ask you, what is something about the business side of the food world or its economics that you really wish more people understood?
I mean, I wish more people were a little bit easier on restaurants in general. They are dealing with so many challenges, and the challenges that they're facing today are even harder. Rent, labor shortages, supply chain volatility, the really quick movement of social media, and how that is really impacting what consumers are asking for. Just simply having to increase prices often causes an uproar among consumers, but often those price increases are not just so they can make an extra buck, it's so that they can survive. I wish people would kind of understand a lot of those challenges that those operators are facing and really just kind of be a little bit lighter towards them. I think offering some helpful critique is great, but straight criticism is just not what restaurants need to hear right now. They're dealing with enough challenges.
And what is one food or drink experience you recommend to everyone?
In Chicago, there is a restaurant that I absolutely love. It's called Sushi Suite, and it is a tasting menu, 17 course, nigiri. The chef is right in front of you preparing everything. I mean, having just any sort of tasting menu experience, I think is something that everybody should be able to experience once in their lifetime. And I think in general, going to Portillo's, getting a classic Chicago hot dog, I think that's another just more casual experience that I think everybody should have as well. I mean, being from Chicago, getting that classic Chicago favorite.
And just layering the ketchup on top, of course.
Absolutely not. You couldn't. You can't do that. No ketchup on hot dogs in Chicago.
Yeah, I know. Well, Lizzy Freier, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Alex.